Monster Mom, episode number 1. My mother-in-law spent years trying to prove that I would never be good enough for her son. Well, eventually, I learned to play her game better than she ever could. My husband and I have been married for many years now. These days, I barely speak to his mother, and honestly, my life has been so much more peaceful because of it. My husband doesn't complain. Whenever his mom stays out of our marriage, everything between us is wonderful. But it wasn't always like that. When we first got married, I desperately wanted her to like me. I cooked, cleaned, organized family dinners, and tried to be the perfect daughter-in-law. Most people genuinely liked me. She didn't. Instead, she found quiet little ways to make me feel unwelcome. None of it was obvious enough for my husband to notice. Looking back, I realized she was incredibly good at psychological games. 1 week after our wedding, we left on our honeymoon. Before leaving, we gave my mother-in-law a spare key so she could collect the mail and check on our apartment. Huge mistake. When we came home, I froze. My kitchen had been completely reorganized. The furniture in the living room had been moved. Some of my framed photos had disappeared. Even a few personal belongings, including some underwear, were missing. I completely broke down. My husband was angry too and immediately confronted his mother. When he came back, he looked exhausted. "You know what she said?" he asked. "She says she was only trying to help." According to her, she had done nothing wrong. Then she started crying. My husband didn't know what to think. He'd never experienced two women fighting over control like this. Instead, he simply offered to help me put everything back. He really tried. The kitchen, unfortunately, ended up even more confusing than before. Honestly, his mother had never even taught him basic household skills. But after that day, I noticed something. Whenever she crossed a line, she waited until my husband wasn't around. Then she'd give me this smug little smile, followed by a slow nod. It was her silent way of saying, "I won." To everyone else, she was a saint. She volunteered at church. She helped charities. Everyone in town loved her. Years passed. She grew older, but she never changed. If anything, she became even better at pretending to be a sweet, harmless old lady. People brought her groceries. Neighbors checked on her. Volunteers visited just to keep her company. Then one day, she spent a week in the hospital. My husband took her house key so he could collect the mail while she was gone. Without telling him, I quietly made a copy. I had been waiting for this opportunity for years. I even took a few days off work, claiming I was too sick to come in. Instead, I visited her house, and I helped. I rearranged almost everything. I threw away a few cracked porcelain decorations. I removed several family photos from the walls and hid them inside a closet. I reorganized her clothing, her bathroom cabinets, her closet, pretty much everything except the living room. I didn't want my husband noticing anything too obvious. The day she was discharged from the hospital, I surprised him by offering to help clean her house before she got home. He couldn't believe I was volunteering. I simply smiled and said, "I think it's time we put the past behind us." Together we vacuumed, mopped, dusted, and made the place spotless. Then we drove to pick her up. The moment she walked through the front door, I could see it. She knew something was wrong. She just couldn't figure out what. Then she noticed the missing photographs. "What happened to my pictures?" she demanded. My husband looked confused. "What pictures?" "You took them." I smiled politely. "Oh no, I only helped your son clean the house." My husband confirmed it. We had only cleaned, nothing else. She exploded. I quietly turned to my husband. "Maybe my being here is upsetting her. I'll head home." He looked completely confused. He couldn't understand why his mother suddenly seemed so hostile toward me. Eventually he agreed. I smiled warmly, wished them both a nice evening, and walked toward the door. My husband couldn't see my face anymore, but she could. I looked directly into her eyes, smiled, and gave her the exact same slow nod she'd used on me for years. She recognized it instantly. She was absolutely furious. Later that evening, my husband told me his mother had accused me of every horrible thing imaginable. I simply sighed. Poor woman. Maybe she's starting to lose her memory. He nodded sadly. I guess she's getting older. Maybe she is. Or maybe... She finally understood what it feels like when someone quietly invades your home, pretends they were only trying to help, and leaves you questioning your own sanity. After all, one day, I'll be the one choosing her nursing home. And thanks to her,
I've become exceptionally good at pretending to be the kind, caring daughter-in-law everyone thinks I am. She disappeared for 25 years, then expected to be welcomed like a loving grandmother. I'm a single father. I raised my son completely on my own because just a few days after he was born, his mother decided she didn't want to be a parent anymore. She looked at me in the hospital and said she wasn't ready to be a mother. She refused to feed him, refused to hold him, and insisted she wanted nothing to do with either of us. At first, I thought she was suffering from postpartum depression. I begged her to give it time and promised I'd support her through anything. But she had already made up her mind. She packed her belongings, walked out of the hospital, and before leaving, she said something I'll never forget. "I never want to see either of you again." That was the last time I ever saw her. To this day, I've always suspected her mother had something to do with it. During the pregnancy, my mother-in-law constantly told her daughter she was too young, that having a baby would ruin her future, and that this wasn't the right time to become a parent. I can't prove she convinced her to leave, but I've never been able to shake that feeling. So there I was, 21 years old, holding a newborn in my arms and suddenly raising him alone. It wasn't easy. I dropped out of college and worked every job I could find just to provide for my son. Thankfully, I wasn't completely alone. Friends, neighbors, and family stepped in whenever they could. They watched him while I worked, taught me how to care for a baby, and helped me survive those difficult years. I'll never forget what they did for us. As my son got older, life slowly became more manageable. He started daycare, and eventually, I was able to work without constantly relying on other people. For years, I secretly hoped his mother would come back, not necessarily to rebuild our relationship, but at least to meet her son. She knew exactly how to reach me. She had my phone number, she knew where we lived, she could have written a letter. She never did, not once. She never called, never visited, never even asked how he was doing. When my son was little, he'd ask heartbreaking questions. Why didn't mom want me? Did I do something wrong? I never knew how to answer. I refused to speak badly about his mother. I figured one day he'd make his own decisions. Today, my son is 25 years old. He's intelligent, hardworking, kind, and independent. I'm incredibly proud of the man he's become. A long time ago, he decided he didn't want to talk about his mother anymore. He simply said, if she didn't want us, that's her loss. And honestly, I agreed. Then something happened that neither of us expected. One afternoon, there was a knock on our front door. Standing there was my former mother-in-law. No phone call, no warning, nothing. She had simply decided it was time to visit her grandson. At first, I barely recognized her. 25 years changes a person. She acted as though she'd been a loving grandmother his entire life, like she had never disappeared. When my son opened the door, he didn't recognize her either. I'd shown him old photographs over the years, just in case she or his mother ever came back. But neither of us actually believed that day would ever arrive. Without hesitation, she rushed toward him with open arms. She hugged him, smiled, and started asking how he'd been. She told him how handsome he'd grown up to be. My son gently stepped back. He looked confused. I explained, "This is your grandmother." He simply replied, "Oh," then turned around and walked away. She looked offended. Then she turned to me. "What kind of son did you raise? He can't even greet his own grandmother properly. Didn't you ever tell him about us?" I couldn't help myself. Technically, she was a complete stranger. She had never met him, not once. So why would she expect him to treat her like family? My son calmly answered, "Dad showed me your picture years ago." But I didn't need a photograph. I needed a grandmother. That completely caught her off guard. She clearly hadn't expected him to ask questions. He looked directly at her. "Where's my mother?" His grandmother smiled. "Oh, she's doing wonderfully. She has a wonderful husband now, and 2 beautiful children. She's moved on from that unfortunate situation surrounding your birth." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She spoke as if abandoning her own child had simply been an unfortunate inconvenience, as if my ex-wife were somehow the victim. Then my son asked the obvious question, "Why did she leave me?" Her answer shocked both of us. She was so young. Having a baby at that age would have ruined her life. She wanted her freedom. You should understand. The funny part? She wasn't some teenage girl. She was 24 years old, older than I was, and I was only 21. I could have walked away too. But I didn't, because I loved my son, and I wanted to be his father. At that point, I was ready to throw her out. But my son raised one hand. He had one final question. "If my mother didn't want to be my mother, why didn't you want to be my grandmother?" She paused, then shrugged. I had my own life. I didn't have time to raise a grandchild, but grandchildren are supposed to take care of their grandparents when they get old. That's why I'm here now. The room went completely silent. Then my son looked her straight in the eyes. "You should leave. And don't ever come back. You weren't there when I needed you. So don't expect me to be there for you now." She stormed toward the door, but before leaving, she turned toward me one last time. "I knew a single father could never raise a decent man. He's rude. If he'd grown up in an orphanage, he would have turned out better than he did with you." Then she slammed the door behind her. After 25 years of silence, she showed up expecting love, forgiveness, and support. Not because she'd earned it, simply because she shared our DNA. What she never understood was that family isn't built by blood, It's built by the people who stay, and after disappearing for a quarter of a century, she was nothing more than a stranger standing on our front porch.